So basically, thanks all for coming back. I know it's been a long day, and I'm just going to go through the 6 superpowers of EdTech enterprises. So it's funny that we were talking about changing our research to be more fun. So I'm trying here. Let me know what you think. But basically, this is based on my doctoral work, which doesn't sound like this at all in the thesis, but it's been distilled down into the 6 superpowers. And so it's called the LT framework. And it's really, what do we think the qualities of a responsible company might be? What does it mean to be a responsible ed tech company? And this isn't going to be a lecture on my research by any means. It's just what I'd like to do by the end is give you some insight into the 6 superpowers, essentially. And just so that it could help you in your role in the edtech ecosystem, wherever that is, but just to help you to reflect and give you a chance to think about how that relates to your role. It's going to be collaborative. So we're going to be sharing a link to a Miro board, which is separated into the 6 superpowers, and feel free to, as I'm going through them, to write comments. We'll stop a couple times in the presentation so you could share your thoughts. We could have a discussion about them and to see how it relates to you. And if you, and if you have any questions throughout, you could always also ask in the chat, and hopefully we'll get to them throughout. And so that's basically it. So I'm just gonna, that's me when I used to go into UCL. I've not been there in a while. But this is basically, this whole research or what I'm presenting today is based on my doctoral thesis, which I'm going to be defending next week, which is called Theorizing Evidence-Informed Learning Technology Enterprises. So a participatory design-based research approach. So I did use that participatory design that Peter was talking about this morning, and how we were all talking about co-designing with other members of the ecosystem in the development of the LT framework. And so LT stands for Evidence Informed Learning Technology Enterprise. And so, and basically the LT framework shows 6 superpowers. And so that's what I'm going to go through. 6 subconstructs, which I'm calling superpowers because that's really what I mean by them. And the context was, it was situated in the Educate program, which was a research accelerator out of University College London that accepted 252 London-based edtech startups. So anywhere from 1 to 250 employees between 2017 to the end of 2019. So last year, this time was our last cohort. And through the program, the goal was to develop research know-how and research capacity in edtech startups so that they could do their own research, and so that they could bring research into the fabric of their business, that data generation into the fabric of their business, so they could make evidence-informed decisions and hopefully have that in the way that they work moving forward and make decisions moving forward. So it was 252 companies in the end that we worked with. My study participants were over 70, so I co-designed with over 70 members of the EdTech ecosystem, from our research team experts to actually, I even co-designed in the last EETN and validated some of the study in February in Finland, which was really fun. And the methodology is design-based research. So Allison was talking about in the morning how design-based research is a really nice tool to still remain academic, but be flexible in areas that are new. And so, basically you don't know what you're gonna get. And so it was really great because I was able to do 6 cycles of research where I validated the theory more and more until I came up with these 6 subconstructs, which turned out to be the 6 superpowers. So that's just a little bit on what it's based on. So what are LTs? LTs are evidence-informed learning technology enterprises. So they're edtech businesses that make decisions with evidence. And basically this whole thing is based on LTs. How do you build them? And we are, if you have the link in the chat, the link should be in the chat now. And so the link will lead you to this LT Superpowers board, where please feel free to comment and put, as I'm going through the 6 superpowers, on how it relates to you or any questions you have, and maybe even other participants can comment on them as well. And hopefully everybody's. So what are the 6 superpowers? I'm going to go through them one at a time, but they're leadership, vision, learning culture, sense of purpose, teamwork, research, know-how, and action orientation. So the first one, leadership vision. And basically each one, I've kind of distilled them into 6 questions that you would be able to, or sorry, into 3 simple questions that you can ask that if you can answer them, that's like the general overview of each superpower, so that it's boiled down and a little bit less cumbersome than the long explanations that are in the thesis. And hopefully these are descriptive enough, but do give me feedback if it's not clear from these. So the first one, basically leadership vision is concerned with these 3 things. Does leadership have a vision of how research fits into the greater organizational goal? So if they understand that this is the goal of where we want the enterprise to get to, and this is how research is going to help us to get there. And does the research vision match the vision of the company? And so what you're researching, does it actually make sense within what you want for the company to achieve? And does leadership make the research vision explicit? So does everyone actually know what the vision is, the research vision of that company is, or is it something that's hidden? And basically that is really obvious through when leaders speak about things, when they justify based on data, and when leaders actually, when they're explaining something, they actually talk about the research that they've done, not just the data that they have, but how they came to that. And you know that there are projects underway. What kind of data are they collecting? How are they collecting it? Who are they collaborating with? And so that's really important for that's the first superpower. An example of that, we could just like a funny example, but an example of no leadership, like of without that vision, what happens is kind of funny, but the Minister of Education of Madagascar ordered 3 lollipops per pupil recently and got fired over it because he thought that would change the taste of the herbal remedy that's not been proven at all to stop coronavirus for the kids, so that they could have the lollipops and then take the taste away. But the president wasn't actually proven that this is what they're gonna give this remedy to the kids. And so making a decision without an evidence base and without a sound evidence base is, that's an example of a lack of leadership vision. Superpower 2 is learning culture. So this is when the enterprise is basically always learning. So is there a culture of openness to knowledge, and are there systems in place to share knowledge inside of the enterprise? And so this really comes back to the construct of Dweck's construct of a growth mindset and a culture of systematically sharing this knowledge within the enterprise. And you can see that when you approach enterprises where new knowledge is not something that's everyone's open to it and it's valued, and there's systems and processes in place to collect new learnings and to share new learnings, and they value that. And so that's a learning culture. And one example that I had with one of the companies that I interviewed, that I co-designed with, is once a week they stop a little earlier and they have a pizza, like an early pizza dinner together. And they just talk about all the things that they learned. And they have a really comfortable situation like set up where it's just all about learning and the ways that they think that they might pivot, they brainstorm, and they have a learning culture embedded into, even like they value it so much that they actually take time away from work to do that and create a space that's really comfortable for everyone to share together with pizza, which they all love. Superpower 3 is sense of purpose. So why is the enterprise doing the research is one question that they should know. Why is the enterprise building the product in the first place? Why do they even exist as an enterprise? What's the education problem they're trying to solve, and what aspect of that are they trying to figure out through the research and empower? And what are the vision and mission of the company in general? Is it clear how research fits into them? So this is really important, and not all enterprises, when you approach teams and employees, the entire enterprise, it needs to be clear to everyone why they're there, from marketing and sales to, if there's a research team, to the leadership needs to make it clear to everyone what they're doing and why they're doing that and the purpose of it. And so one example of this was in the core values of one of the businesses were written on their walls, and their the education purpose was actually written that this is what we do, and they live and breathe it. And so all the decisions that they make are they would have their values and their mission and their vision very clear in that. And it looks nice, and you don't feel like it makes such a big impact. It looks like marketing, but actually it was really important, because when it came down to them doing research, and when it was important to them to pivot based on the research to maintain their integrity, for example. And if it was so front and center with what they did, that those trade-offs between business and research were not so much trade-offs, and it made sense, and made a lot of sense for them to make evidence-informed decisions at all times. Because at the end of the day, being an LT is something that takes away from and sometimes slows you down in your research. Sometimes you have to pivot, and your business is not able to move as quickly as it wants sometimes. And so to make those difficult decisions, you need to have your values in place and know exactly, and all members of the team need to know why they're there. So the salespeople don't make claims, for example, that are not based on knowledge that's actually generated from the research. So there's one of the companies that I worked with did a really good job of embedding that in their culture by physically having it on their walls. You could see that people were more familiar with it, and it was really in all parts of their business. Superpower 4 is teamwork. So the main questions for that are research initiatives conducted in teams? What we saw from the Educate program is that it was really important. Research is tough, and it's important, especially in enterprises. It's important to have members that are represented from different parts of the enterprise. And it's a tough thing to do alone, for one person to understand the context of all different departments and the future and things that have happened in the past, and to encompass all of that, unless it's a very small business if it's still one person or very few people that are constantly in communication. But if the research is done individually, it's generally not an LT, because LTs work together and they produce better results from the research as well. Does the research team have a connection to the other teams in the company? So again, the team has to have knowledge of and represent the entire enterprise. And what systems are in place for individuals to work together on research initiatives? So again, it becomes really clear when you approach an LT that they have these systems in place for the research team to collaborate with other teams, or for the research task force that's made up of other team members who may or may not be collaborating on the research tasks, but that work together on the brainstorming and to understand and setting the context of the research, and distilling the results and looking at the data together and use of that data. So it's really important that these things encompass the whole teams and have representative members of the entire enterprise. And one of the companies that we saw an educator through my PhD research that was so strong in this would actually, the leadership would come with 2 of her team members to the Educate program, and then they would actually go back to the company, and she would reteach it to the rest of the business, and like the leader of the the leadership in the enterprise would reteach it to everyone else like this. They would sit around a table, and the company was about this size. So it was doable to teach it to everyone, but to actually go through all that educate content one more time to achieve that research mastery, or to, and it's, you know, the team members would not have understood it all in detail, because then you have to go through the exercises to really get a mastery of it. And but even to sit there and have everything said back to them, it really to encompass everyone, the ideas that she generated from that that experience was incredible. And the ability to get everyone to brainstorm together on how they would do research. And it really became central to the way that they moved forward. And everyone developed an understanding of what it is to varying degrees. But it was such a great exercise and a great team building experience. Superpower 5 is research know-how. So does the enterprise have the knowledge, expertise to design appropriate research initiatives to assess the efficacy and impact of their products? And appropriate as in the EdTech industry, the dynamic startup, and understanding that this startup is going to be dynamic, is going to change a lot. They're going to pivot. And have they chosen the right research methods that can accommodate that? And if they're approaching it in a, you know, with an experimental design, do they understand that when they do change their products, that it's not going to be, those results won't inform this product. It's not going to inform the product a few iterations down. So it's really important that the company understand and have the mastery of EdTech, mastery of research methods that are appropriate in the EdTech context, which is really what Educate is very good at teaching. And then 2, is there an awareness of the appropriateness of different research methods? And 3, is there an understanding of what sound evidence is and how it should be generated and used? So research know-how in the EdTech context is super important. Yeah, and so that's, you know, through this image is just beyond this experimental LTs methods, you know, you have to be ready for it to go up and down. So much changes, and in the EdTech context, and just really research know-how in this context is really important. And superpower 6 is action orientation. So was the research plan actually acted on? Is the evidence that is generated acted on to make decisions, to pivot? And how do you balance business goals with educational goals and when implementing research findings? And so this is a really important thing to understand, that you're going to keep acting even though you have to pivot so many times. And that's just the nature of the beast with startups. Different opportunities come. Maybe you think that something is right. Your research results sometimes come out just as you're releasing a product. What are you going to do then? And what's the trade-off between those things? These are really important issues that come up a lot of times with EdTech enterprises, and they have to grapple with them, because at the end of the day, it's an enterprise and they need to stay afloat. They have responsibilities to their shareholders. A lot of times they've made promises for a release date of their products. And what does that look like when you're waiting for information to come back? And what's, you know, an action-oriented enterprise look like? And so, and how do they balance that, those decision-making? Are they led by evidence, or are they informed by evidence? Our tools that were developed from out of the 6 superpowers that I've developed through the thesis, one of them is actually the LT survey. So businesses can come and take this survey to tell them where they stand with these 6 superpowers. So it's like a, you know, kind of like a Myers-Briggs or those kinds of things. You sit down, there's tons of questions, and then these are where you stand. It's an assessment of where they stand with the 6 superpowers, and therefore what they need to develop. And so there's a tool to assess it. And then another contribution of my study is a hierarchy. So basically that there are dependencies, and there are the foundation is the leadership vision. So if you take the survey and you need to develop all of them, that leadership vision is really the place to start. And the survey actually outlines all the different facets of each one in a lot more detail than is in this presentation. And so really the basis is leadership vision. Actually, there's an order. So I would do it in this exact order with the development of these superpowers. So first of all, it's the leadership vision and then the learning culture. So once leadership understands and sets the goals for the enterprise, the learning culture is their ultimate goal. Is so important to have a company that is curious, that's always learning, and that's always is obsessed with the data and making sure that they have the right data and making decisions based on that data, and is humble and is open to acting on evidence at all times, and expects to pivot and expects to learn at all times. And doing that research often is really important for them. And then it's the sense of purpose. So it's really clear to everyone what the purpose and the educational goals that they're solving and their values, and sticking to those values no matter how difficult the other things get in the business. It's really important to have that established. And then and teamwork is to make sure that the teamwork, and then that's the basis for applying to gaining the research know-how and those skills in research, and then the action orientation to make sure that it happens. It's really the roof. If there's no action, then there's no point in the rest of it. If you're not going to do the research and they're not going to act on the research and the data that they find. So where to start? I think it's with the shelter. So you're in the wilderness, or you get to a desert island, you need shelter right away. And the shelter in this case, the roof, is really the research, to act on it, to do something, and basically to just get started, for the enterprise to get their feet wet, get started, look for some data that they think is important, and like that action that teaches a lot to the enterprise and how they want to then move forward systematically. The concrete steps of getting started, I think, is first to build that TARP. So do some research. And like I said, I really recommend doing it through the Educate program to learn first, actually learn the research methods, and that's, it's great, and it's free for enterprises. And it's so great that it's starting again in January. I'm so excited for another 250 startups to have that for free. And I hope that Educate's always able to do that and to offer for free to startups who are really doing noble things, and to have this access to knowledge of how to do the research that's empowering for them. And the second thing of getting started is to involve the leadership in the research. I highly recommend that the leadership come to the Educate program, and so that they can then set that foundation and build the house. So I do recommend to get that TARP going, but then for leadership to come and understand and have that experience of building the TARP, so that it can then be a part of the entire enterprise. So further reading, hopefully the thesis will be out soon. So if you do want to read more, a lot more, then it's in there, and that's forthcoming. And then there's a few other articles that are going to be coming out, one with Allison and I and the entire Educate research team. Yeah, Allison's holding my thesis. It's very thick and heavy. And Allison's publishing on the use of boundary objects. There are 3 published works there, which are the basis of the first articles that were written about Educate, if you'd like. And then Allison and I are, like we mentioned before, also going to be writing an article, hopefully in the first half of next year, about the research methods that were most commonly used, and correlating that with the size of the business and their stage of development, which would hopefully be a nice contribution for businesses as well, and very interesting for researchers, of how to support businesses moving forward, and for businesses to maybe develop, concentrate on certain methods depending on their stage of development, so as not to overwhelm them. I'm sorry that a lot of the articles are not out yet, but if you'd like, please contact me and I'll join. I'm creating an LT community, and we'll be sharing all of the articles as they come out and as they're published. And I'm also going to do my very best to continue with this, trying to distill it and make fun images, and I'll try to be fun and make videos, but we'll see. And not, and so if you do like to reach out to me, and I'll keep you in the loop on new findings with LT, and especially, and any researchers, as if you have anything that's relevant as well, I'd love to share it in the community. So that's that. I don't know if there's any questions at this point, or what happened in Miro during this time, but very happy to answer now.
Thank you, Anissa. Thank you very much. And I'll be the first one definitely to join the LT community, because I would love to know more. And I keep my fingers very, very much crossed for you next week. You don't need it, but still, sending good vibes. From the chat, I'm seeing, well, more comments rather than questions. Italo saying that this confirms that leadership and purpose are two of the major factors that contribute to an organization's success. Yeah. Anissa, what do you think about it?
Yes, I totally agree with that. We're both in agreement. And I see that Evelyn wrote that it's all about culture, and this is more than leadership and purpose. And it's really interesting, Evelyn, that I was thinking about that the culture and the learning culture is more than leadership. But actually, from the research, what the research suggested was that it's the leadership sets the culture in the enterprise, and it's really hard for the
I don't know, because when you become leader, you're already in the culture. So culture influence also the leadership, and vice versa. Right. So it's more complicated than that.
Yeah, and so this is, but so we can think about. I didn't look at outside of like the culture that's starting, but the culture that is established. What I'm trying to say is that the leadership needs to be taking the culture is their responsibility, and so they dictate that. So it's really important for them to first have the vision in that. But we could definitely talk about that later. I'll take a look. Well, this is what the research suggested with the enterprises that I spoke to, but I'm really happy to reorder them or to put them on the same level and develop them together. Yeah,
I mean, they are not mutually exclusive, but like you said, Anissa, many of the management research, when you look at the success of the companies, any companies, organizational actors, you need to have the leadership to set the stage, and then you need to create the purpose for the employees. Otherwise, you don't get anything done. Once you get this, the purpose for employees, and all employees have bought into whatever things that the companies are doing through the leadership, then you create that cultures as part of the cycle. Then, so that's without leadership, nothing gets done. So.
But often the leadership you have more when you look at certain. No, if you look at companies, there are also a lot of informal leaders, and they have much more to say than the real leaders. So you have to be careful.
I think that relates very strongly to the size of the companies that Anissa was researching, because we certainly didn't have successes with all of the companies we work with. And, I suppose part of the other data set is reflecting on why this sort of method, if you like, didn't get taken up widely by every single company we work with. It was like, what's not to like about having free support to help you to get better at doing research? But for some of the leadership, it just was not in their vision, and they weren't prepared to move on that, even though they sent members of their teams to come and learn. These members then went back into the companies and couldn't action anything. So that was really obvious. And actually, what did happen was people moved around. I mean, we had people leave one company in the project, go work for another company, because the vision was there, and the talent was spotted. And it was really interesting that there was quite a lot of fluidity in terms of grabbing the research-minded employees and getting them inside your company, because they had the skill set, the research know-how, but nowhere to activate it. But so there's quite a number of case studies, aren't there, Anissa, going to come out that pull out on some of these more nuanced findings.
Definitely. And the opposite, I mean, looking at it in the opposite way, that the learning culture, it's not general culture, but it's the culture of actually getting feedback, constantly learning, being open, can be stifled by leadership. So leadership can make sure that there aren't processes to learn, that it's embarrassing to say that you made a mistake, or that decision that you chose a feature that you thought was going to work, or you did it based on a certain literature review, and then actually, you have some data that you thought it worked and it came out and it made it worse. And so that's actually a good thing. You want to establish a culture of, this is great that we know that actually this didn't work. And so that's, if you think about it that way, then it's a stifling versus the opening up of that is the responsibility of leadership to create those processes where it's systematic to learn. So learning culture is not just airy-fairy like culture, but it's also what have they established to get that information back. So there's a system of learning and a process where you are constantly pivoting, and there's an expectation to that. So
yeah, of course, I was looking more at the culture in a general way. So and learning culture is a part of culture, but if you say it like that, yes, it's true.
Oh yeah, so that's not like I'm not looking at culture in a general way. That's out of my depth, but that's more in the sense of what's in an EdTech enterprise. So it's not like an anthropological culture so much, but inside the survey, it's outlined like these are all the things that are meant by each subconstruct. So I boiled it down into 3 questions for this, but it would be so long if we went through all of them. And we're trying to make them fun.
Yeah.
Lisa, and what was the most challenging step out of the 6 in your experience with the startups?
The challenging, I mean, well, I think the thing that can make or break it is the leadership, really, and that's the foundation. And so there was a challenge where we saw some enterprises, like Allison said, come in and it didn't sustain. So they did all of the rest of the things, but the leader actually didn't have that learning culture. And so the team that came to educate, did so much, and then they went back and it didn't manifest in the business and it didn't continue. And so I think the biggest challenge is to change the mindset of leaders that are quite passionate and closed-minded in a certain way. So it's that opening up of the mindset of the leadership. Was really challenging, but the specific also challenge of, I think of the 6, that's the most important one. I mean, it's ordered, I think, in that way. But Educate itself was focused on developing the research know-how subconstruct. And so encouraging the action and advising on how to set up your teams. And so that's really like what that tarp in the shelter that Educate really helped to develop. And so that was the challenge that Educate took on, and I think did a really good job with it, which I was doing my doctoral work on it, but I wasn't developing the research training program, and Allison led that team, and I think she did an amazing job with it. And there was how many researchers were under Allison? I think it was
I think we were up to about 9 or 10 at one point. Yeah. So it was quite a team. Well, we had a lot of companies to look after.
Yeah, it's a great team effort.
Great. In the chat, Samuel has comments. There are no questions, but there's a comment from Samuel. Great explanation by Alison in the youth model being studied some students at UCL. We have been exposed to the implicit value culture behind design. Samuel, would you like to unmute yourself and share your thoughts, share your comments with us?
Hey, Milena, thank you. Yeah, I was just listening to the conversation, and I just reminded myself of one of the weeks where we were actually taken back to look at the, the values behind design processes. So, for example, if you look at the educational technology, what will these leaders or what will these designers be influenced by? What are their value systems? So, for example, one of the reasons that we looked at, there was a situation where some bridges that were designed many years ago by some rich people in America. Somebody decided that the bridge should be designed in a way where buses could not go under the bridge, and this was to prevent lower class family members from going to that part of town because they wanted only the rich people, affluent people to go. And obviously affluent people have cars. So only cars could then drive under the bridge, which was very, very insightful and very eye-opening. So on the subject of leadership, I was just thinking that obviously if you merge the leadership part, of the business with the culture that is influencing that leader, then it will drive the business, and so I can imagine that this will form some of the challenges that Anissa and her, her group would have, because some of these values or culture is implicit, and even though the leader may attend this program, take on board all the elements, all the studies, they are still driven by this culture and this implicit value as to what they want their EdTech to achieve, what they want their business to achieve. And sometimes it's not very clear, it's not very open. And so it's difficult for them to take on board everything. They may come, listen, learn for a week, go back and stick to their old ways of doing things. Thank you.
Definitely. Anissa, would you like to comment on Samuel's comment?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's really important. And so that doesn't make them an LT. Like they're not evidence informed if they're not making decisions based on their evidence. So it's really, we have that a lot. Like there's startups, I've been around entrepreneurs my whole life that have great ideas and have a lot of passion and believe in it and talk about it. And yeah, we could do this. And actually it's so funny when you put them in the same room as researchers, because, you haven't done it. Like, well, why are you saying that you can do this? You haven't done it. You actually haven't proved that works. You haven't even done it. Like they move in this like almost a salesy way, and they're like 10 steps ahead. And of course we can do that too. And we can do that. And it's going to make a huge difference. You're going to learn 10 times faster. It's like 10 times faster than what? Where did you come up with this information? And so it's really important that, when like you go to a workshop, go back, but it's, the important thing with LT is that it's not, there are things that you need to do, and there's it's like almost like a checklist under each superpower. Like you have to make decisions based on this evidence. You need to be systematic about the data that you're collecting. You have to know what you're collecting and why, and it needs to be a part of the process. And I can go into a business and say, okay, when are you guys sharing your learnings? You can see if someone's an LT or if they have that, because if it's not systematic, it's not happening sometimes. Like even that example of getting together and having pizza to talk about what you learned is systematic. It's informal. It's systematic because the founder understood that they have to be comfortable so that they can share what they learned, and somebody's taking notes on that, and that becomes rich data like once a week that they actually act on. But to have that, you have to act on it. It's really difficult to just throw words at this, but there's so many different things that I would look for now after developing the framework that are indicators. And I'm sure like as we continue to do research, there's going to be so many more, and some of these things will probably be change a lot, or maybe they'll be disproven, but there's a lot out there that you can't fake. You can't fake it with data. I mean, you have to keep searching. And the whole idea with being open-minded, and if they're not pivoting, if they haven't continued to pivot, then they're not telling the truth. I mean, you can just talk to them, and they're not evidence-informed businesses. They're, maybe they have great gut instincts, but they're not evidence-informed. So like, I'm not against gut instinct. I feel like maybe you have a great idea about something, but we need to also have evidence, because you have a responsibility to your users and to your learners. And a part of that, I just saw somebody wrote, don't forget your learners when you're co-designing, and it's really important to have learners as a part of that team too. So yeah, but I feel like culture, this has been a really interesting experience, like sharing it with you. Like the word culture is not culture in that sense. It's actually like there's a checklist of things of being like open to learning. And so it's actually more concrete things. And so that's what they need to do. And so it's really using this framework, you can go in to see if this, if it is an evidence-informed technology enterprise. It's not lip service situation because they have to do a lot of things.
You just reminded me when you were speaking there, Anissa. Do you remember the time we were invited to go into a well-known EdTech company that was having a Friday lunch and learn? And we were invited to go in and tell about, they had a participant in the company who was part of Educate. We were invited in to go and meet the colleagues. It was the senior leadership team in a room with lovely sandwiches. And we did our 10, 15-minute presentation. And then no one else in the room spoke except the CEO. Now, we knew in seconds that that company did not have a learning culture because no one else's voice was even heard. So it's really interesting. Anissa's point is you don't have to be in there very long to sort of see through the cracks of, you know, what might be sort of on the external, because this is a CEO who talked highly about what their company was gaining from being involved in the program. It was a very flagship sort of thing for them to be involved in, but we had a hunch, and when we went in there, we certainly could see why the participant was completely unable to do anything in relation to why she was there. So all these sort of mixed messages that you can't hide. You can't hide.
It's really hard to hide it. Or even the one question that I would ask is just go straight for the tarp, like go for the roof. If you're going into an enterprise, just ask them, what kind of research are you doing? And see if they can tell you. If that you can't make that up on the spot, you know, it's just what kind of data are you looking at? How do you know that? That's it. And see, because that's like, there's so many. And then you could go deeper and like, you know, the LT develops all the superpowers and all the things within them. But the very first thing that you can just ask is, do you even have a roof over your head with the data or not? And it becomes really, really clear. But yeah, and then if you have a chance to go into the teams, if people are not comfortable speaking, then they don't have a learning culture.
Can I make a point about sort of from the user's perspective in schools? Something that really used to frustrate me was that schools are quite ill-equipped to choose, when they're selecting technology, to choose the technology that is underpinned by the right sort of learning culture, the commitment to research and so on, because you can't always tell. And so you receive all the flashy demos and promises of how this tech will change teaching in your school. And the amount of times I've been around the BET show and had people pitch to me, and so you try and unpick a little, and the number of companies that say, oh, we've developed it with teachers, we've spoken, we've been in schools, and that's not the same as research. I mean, you know, you could have wheel a science teacher in and say, what do you think about this? Okay, we've designed it with teachers, but it's not the same. And so it's really difficult for when we're talking about that triangle, for the schools to actually know who's been involved at the right level and who hasn't.
Yeah, no, it's really tough. I mean, honestly, like the LT framework right now is designed for researchers to go into enterprises. I mean, it's not something that, like, as a researcher, you can say, what kind of research are you doing? And then they can tell you something, and then you can just call bullshit if you want, you know, for lack of but like, you know, you could just say you're not actually doing anything that's not going to generate the right data. But at the BET show, you talk to salespeople, say, what is this data based on, and see if you feel like what they're saying makes sense, you know, because salespeople, unfortunately, are very enthusiastic and sometimes will say things that are not true. And so it's really important to see what, you know, if they actually are using any data to back what they're saying. And that's one of the indicators of a really research-minded, like visionary leader of an LT uses data in the way that they speak all the time. And so when they're bringing up, this is a decision that we made because of this study, this is the decision made because of this evidence, like they're not just saying it, but that you know that there's information, like there's data behind it. But it's such an imperfect market right now, Dina. Like I think the best you can do at a show like BET is to ask what research they've done, how do you know this, what's your data behind it, and see if they have any kind of figures. But I mean, ultimately, this is like pharmaceuticals 100 years ago. It wasn't regulated at all, and people were selling snake oil. And then I don't want EdTech to be over-regulated, where you stifle entrepreneurs that want to do amazing things. And so, but we have to come to this understanding of what an evidence-informed enterprise is, and at least maybe use tools like the Edwards to show the research mindedness of enterprises, and then explore how we can protect our buyers of educational technology. But yeah, the best you can do is ask them about their research and their data, I think, Tina.
Thank you, Anissa, and thank you, Dina, as well for this comment and this question. I totally agree with that. We have a lot of companies right now, and very often linked to education, or well, experts in education that would promote themselves as being disruptive, reinventing everything, which are probably two most popular words in 2020: disrupt and innovate around education. But then when you ask what you said, Anissa, when you ask, okay, why do you do it? And they normally cannot explain it with anything else apart from gut feeling, and because we have the proof that it's getting sold. So there are no proofs that it works. There are proofs that it brings money, and that's enough of the proof that they need to move on with the same kind of culture, structure, and product.
Yeah, exactly. And so I'm all about, I mean, gut feeling by all means. If you have a great idea that comes from the universe, awesome. But then actually test it so that, to do your users justice.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any more questions in the chat. Nobody's raising hands either. So I think this is the moment to wrap up today's session. Thank you very much, Anissa. Thank you, Alison, for your insights and really interesting summaries of your work and of other people's work as well. Alison, in your case, the summary of all the research that you presented, I find it personally very, very valuable. So thanks for that. Yeah, well, as we said, we need to ask other people, not only the CEOs and experts, what's happening in the world of education. So next week, we will be listening to students, so to everybody that is receiving education. And I'm really, really curious about what you came up with and what you will share with us, because that's what experts need to know in order to go to follow the right direction. We need to know your point of view. So next week, we are meeting with our students. Thank you very much today, and have a lovely weekend.